Welcome to AWAI's Great Books Club with your host, Marcella Allison.
Our August selection is Ogilvy on advertising, and my special guest this month is David Deutsch. And I have to say, I was so looking forward to this call, not that I haven't looked forward to all of them, but David and I have been working together. I figured out it is 10 years this year. We met at boot camp in April of 2005 at a special boardroom boot camp. So for those of you who are still on the fence and deliberating about boot camp, if you have any doubt that going to boot camp can truly change your career, I am about as close as you can get to a billboard advertisement for coming, because David and I met, as I said, 10 years ago. We just this past when did we find out, David? Was it May or June? We found out we had our our most recent control for kitchen cabinet cures for boardroom.
Right.
It has changed the entire course of my career, and I am so excited to have him here, not only because he's been a great mentor, but because he's also become a terrific friend, and I'm just thrilled that he's going to be here with us today. So without further ado, I am welcome David to the call today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I would add that, I love going to the boot camp too, and certainly one of the best things I've gotten from boot camp is having met you, and as you say, as a friend, but also as a colleague. We've worked together on things, and we've worked together on things that have made a lot of money, and we've just worked together on a boardroom control, which looks like it's going to make us a lot of money. And,
yeah, that's always good.
I've learned a lot from working with you, and so
here you can see our straight up conservative headshots, and then this is what we're really like. David and Paris and I were together. Was this Philly, when we all went to Philly and hung out?
Yes, I think it was.
Because we have a love of good food and good times, and so this is the best part about being a copywriter. We say this all the time, but I just have to say it again, is the friendships and the relationships that we make. One of the reasons why I asked David to be on this call, other than that he's just been a fantastic partner to me and I've learned so much from him, is because he actually worked with David Ogilvy. So on your screen, you see the sort of left brain introduction of David Ogilvy. He was a renowned ad executive. He was an excellent businessman. He's considered the father of advertising. He started out as a chef and a door-to-door salesman, and then became the owner of one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. Time magazine called him as the most sought-after wizard in today's advertising industry in 1962. But David, you actually worked with him in person. So I wondered if you just wanted to say a couple words about what he was like as a person. Give us some down, like, did he fart at his desk? Like, give me some details here.
Well, Ogilvy was very typical of a lot of geniuses, where, he was brilliant. He just had a brilliant mind for advertising, for facts, for getting to the root of a problem, for solving problems, for creating solutions like the Pepperidge Farm guy, and the Man in the Hathaway shirt, the eye patch.
Right.
And at the same time, he could be tremendously difficult, be a pain in the neck. I know. Like some people, you don't even have to say
I
that.
Didn't say it. I did not say.
You will enjoy this too, particularly in restaurants. He could be a real, like, he would order like cornflakes. He would, have to have the food waiting for him when he got there.
Oh, wow.
Just really could just be very on a different plane. But a lot of people are like that when they're geniuses. There's just their brain is on a different place, and they pay for that by just not being as societally functional as other people. I mean, he could be charming, and he could, of course, be all that. But, like someone like Churchill, he could just be tremendously difficult. Someone once said about
Go ahead.
I was going to say, someone once said about Churchill, he was the most difficult damn guy to work with. He said, but thank God I did, and had the experience of knowing that people like him actually walk the earth.
Oh, wow. And I can tell now, having gone back through this book, I can see so much of his influence on you, especially when, and we're going to talk about this a lot more at the end, but when we're looking at big ideas together and broad concepts, and I get so stuck in the minutia, I can really see where his influence on you and how your creative brain works comes through, and that's something we're going to kind of see in person and dig into today. I just had to pull these two quotes from the book because I just thought they were great. The first is just so true, right? When I write an advertisement, I don't want you to tell me that you find it creative. I want you to find it so interesting that you buy the product. And how often we get caught up in this idea of being creative and clever, I think especially in Madison Avenue advertising, maybe less so, probably in direct mail, but this idea, all of us can get caught up into thinking we're being clever, right? And then really he's like, the idea is not to be creative, the idea is to sell the product. Right. And when we lose sight of that, that's when we get in trouble.
And even, you could even interpret that word creative in a lot of ways too. Like if someone reads my copy, I don't want them to tell me it's creative. I don't want them to tell me it's good. I just want them to say, where can I buy this? Do you have a copy of this? Can I order this?
Right. That's true. That's when we always know that a bullet for a book is working, is when someone says, do you mind sending me that book, or do I get a free copy for doing the survey? Or exactly.
Or what's the answer to that bullet? I got to know.
Exactly. Or they're emailing you. Can you tell me what the
And of course we've forgotten because we wrote
we have no idea. We got to go find the book, because we wrote 750 bullets between now and then. What I want to do is do both. So I'm going to sort of imitate how you and I work together, which is I can get caught up in the detailed how-to, which you lovingly refer to me as, rule number 486 for headlines, but I like my little fence posts and structures and rules. And you keep bringing it up to the higher level and saying, but why do I care, and what's the point of this, and where are you going? So what I'm going to do is actually kind of mirror how we work together. I'm going to start out with some of the rules, because he really does cover a lot of ground of just good old-fashioned horse sense, right, of how to write a good advertisement as we're going through here. And then when we get to the end, I want to take it up to the meta level and have the conversation about sort of his overall genius. So one of the first things I wanted to start with, and this is something that you had focused on when we are looking at the next series of ads, which is this idea of providing useful information. And of course, when you and I work together, this comes into play so much so when we're working on a boardroom project. But again, he says, the purpose of my ads was to project the agency as knowing more about advertising. You may argue that this strategy was ill-advised, knowledge being no guarantee of creativity. There's that word again. But at least it was unique, because no other agency could have run such advertisements. They lacked the required knowledge. My ads not only promised useful information, they provided it, and they worked. And I'm just going to flip through a series of these, David. Go ahead.
I was going to say, he's talking about very specific ads that he ran for his agency, not his advertising in general, although it is true of his advertising in general, of course, that it's based on an intensive knowledge of the product. Just like his ads for his own agency are based on an intensive knowledge of his own agency and of advertising itself.
So we've got, here's his series. There were 6 of them. How to create corporate advertising that gets results, how to launch new products, how to make your sales promotions more profitable, how much should you spend on advertising, how to advertise travel, how to create food advertising that sells. And when you and I were talking about this, we said, well, for one thing, these are almost like mini white papers, right, selling his organization with information.
They're very advertorial in a certain way, too. It's not like, how we create killer food advertising that moves stuff off the shelves. It's just how to create food advertising that sells. And if you want to know, you read this. And we're not shoving something in your face. I think so much advertising these days is so obviously selling and shoving something at you, and it creates a resistance. And with Ogilvy, he never created resistance. If anything, he created the opposite of resistance. He drew you in with his charm and his wit and his wanting you to be informed.
I think that's a great way to put it. And then he goes on, this is, of course, relying more broadly than these ads Well, you know what? I want to pause here for 2 seconds, and I want to just ask you. So Ogilvy had this brilliant idea, right, where he creates this campaign that clearly shows he's got the chops and he knows what he's doing because, like he said, no one else could have created these campaigns because they didn't know what I knew. They hadn't learned what I had learned about advertising. Is there anything that you see here that can help new writers who are perhaps working with smaller clients who are not as skilled, maybe don't have as much, obviously if you're working for an Agora or a boardroom, they know more, they've forgotten more about marketing than I'll ever know. They've been doing it for a really long time, and Marty was obviously a genius at it. But for someone who's working with maybe the local veterinarians or chiropractors or hair salons or smaller companies just getting started that don't have, a huge advertising and marketing department, how can they take this concept? Is there any ideas in here that might work for them in terms of educating their prospects and being seen as an expert?
Sure. The only thing I would say first is I don't know that I would limit it quite that much. I think I never cease to be surprised that clients are they're good at what they do. They're good at running the company, and they're good at the marketing, and they're good at the lists, and they're good at all that sort of stuff. And they're even good at kind of knowing what works and what doesn't because they've run things or whatever. But they really don't know a lot about what goes into it and what we do and how we do what we do and all this stuff that we know about things that we've learned either from AWAI or from reading Ogilvy or from reading this or from reading that and from Clayton and from all these places. So I think even relatively young writers in going to more than the local beauty shop or something can still do white papers or advertorials or create a letter that really informs the client of something that they don't know, of looking at something differently. Maybe it's some aspect of something that you specialize in. You specialize in autoresponders, or you specialize in this, you specialize in that. And so anyway, I would kind of apply that to
I think
an
that's really
broader.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I was just sort of brainstorming for my own business off the top of my head. One of the areas of specialty that I have is in writing about options trading, only because by sheer dumb luck, I started my career with Bernie Schaefer at Schaefer's Investment Research, and all they did was trade options. And they had about, 56 different strategies, it seemed like. So I realized I do this verbally. Like when I'm on the phone with a client, I will often say, well, my specialty is options, and then when they do options, I'll say, here's what I've learned about selling options. Here's how I phrase the trade stories. Here's how I address people who are either sophisticated option traders, but here's how I approach people who haven't traded options. Here's how I convince people to trade options. Like, I could totally see myself doing a mini white paper like this on some of the things I've learned about how you write to option traders. I think so. And here,
not
we've
even
got an
including
idea.
what you know. That's not even including what you know about copy that you don't think that you know in a certain way, or that you've never really turned into. It's about turning what you know into kind of intellectual property. It's putting a name on something. This is my technique for breaking through resistance. I call it the resistance buster technique, and here's how I do it. That's very interesting for someone at Boardroom or Agora or any company to read about and want to know about, and positions you as an expert. And that's something that any copywriter, I think, can, with a little looking inside their own head and a little research,
Absolutely.
use.
So I'm going to just point out that, guys, we've just given you just sort of ad hoc here off the top of our heads one idea that you could bring to boot camp this year in terms of a way you could do something like this. And I would say, because these people are busy and they're easily overwhelmed, look what Ogilvy did. He didn't write 56 pages. He limited himself to 1 page. And he even says in the book how many words each of these were. So I would challenge you. Here's one next step that you could do. If you're coming to boot camp, or if I've now convinced you to come to boot camp, sit down, take the specs from Ogilvy from his book, and see if you can come up with your own version of, so mine would be something like how to advertise option trading services. I mean, I'm just winging it, but you know what I mean? So think of what it is that you know, or use David's idea, right, which is would you say the resistance buster technique that, you know, breaks down all barriers with your prospect. So I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but I think right there is a really good tip for something that you could bring to boot camp. So
what if somebody, I know you just said you didn't want to spend any more time on this. But
I know, but you're creative.
I never pay attention
to it. Come on.
You know, what if somebody brought a thing that they gave out? It said, what every publisher should know about hiring a copywriter.
Oh, my God, that would be brilliant, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and that's just one possible way of implementing this.
I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
And the people on the call, you're hearing it first, so you got to jump start right there. So I want to jump back to this idea of helpful information, because that's really what we're talking about, giving your prospect, whether it's someone that you want to work for or the larger prospect that you're writing to, information that's helpful. So I loved this quote. He says, on average, helpful information is read by 75% more people than copy which deals only with the product. This ad, I'm going to show you in a minute, told how Rinso gets out stains. It was read and remembered by more people than any detergent ad that had ever been researched. And then I love this part, and this is what I want to talk about. But it should never have run because it was off strategy. It did not deliver the agreed selling promise that Rinso washes whiter. The photograph shows different kind of stains. The blood was my own. I am the only copywriter who has literally bled for his clients. And when you and I were kicking this around in the call, you know, I think what he's saying is if this was following his own principles, there would have been a before and after, right? There would have been this with all the stains and this really helpful information. I know it's too tiny to read on your screen, but trust me, all it says is, you know, how to get out ketchup, how to get out blood, how to get out paint, how to get out, you know, smoke. But then there would have been, right, David, a corresponding on the right that showed all those stains gone, like we saw in many of the Tide commercials and the bleach commercials in the years that P&G used to run them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, one thing I would say about this, too, is Ogilvy himself said in Ogilvy on Advertising in the beginning, he said they're not really rules. Everyone says that what I put forth are rules. And he said they're not really. It's just like I found this to be true. Research has found 75% more. That doesn't mean that that's the rule you should do that. It just means, like, if you want to increase your odds of getting read, here's a way to do it. Doesn't mean there aren't other ways. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It just means that this is what was found. So it's,
I know, but you
more,
know I like the safety of rules.
Yes, well, we all
at
do.
All times.
We all do, of course. But, you know, it speaks to, you know, the rule about before and after is not really a rule. That doesn't mean there's not a better way to do that. And he was open to that and found it.
I think that's true. And now just to annoy you, I'm going to go over the rules on headlines. And you're going to tell me, well, let's kick these around and see where we think we've got rules and where we've got exceptions here. So the first one, of course, is the one we've been talking about, headlines that offer the reader helpful information, like how to win friends and influence people, attract above average readership. Of course, in this case, it was how to take out stains, right? And these, right. And what you can't see in that tiny print were the actual directions. It wasn't just a tease. He actually told you how to take out stains.
Right, and I might add, quite engagingly and wittily and interestingly.
Right,
and
right.
Considering he was writing about stains, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Exactly, but you can make even a stain interesting. And we'll see that because I've typed up, I didn't type up this one, but I've typed up some others that we're coming up on, and we'll get to see how he does that. The one thing I wanted to ask you about around this offering helpful information is, I just wonder if you could say a word or two about the balance. We talk about this all the time when we're working on a boardroom package, and you'll see if we can get Michelle's permission to post that one, and I'm guessing we can, even if we have to wait a month or two. What's the balance between giving away so much information if you're selling an information product? I mean, what we have to remember here is these weren't information products. He was selling Rinso, so he could tell you everything about how to get the stain out. But what if I was selling you a special report about how to get any stain out of any fabric? I wouldn't want to tell you all of that, because then why would you need the report? You just cut the ad out.
Right, right. You know,
so, go ahead.
It's hard to translate that into rules per se, because that's where your feeling comes in, and it's so kaleidoscopically dependent on how much space you have, what your medium is, who you're going to.
Right.
But what you want to be feeling is, you want to be giving away information. You want to know why you're giving it away, right? You're giving it away for that idea of reciprocity. You generate reciprocity. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. I'll buy your product. You were nice to me. And the other is you want people to read it and go, wow, if that's the kind of stuff that's in here,
I got to get the whole thing.
Then I got to get that. And once you've done that, then you need to stop doing it and you can start teasing a little more. And you can mix giving away with tease. You can give away, there may be 3 things, you give away 1 thing, but you tease the other 2. So you mix it up a little bit. You don't be quite so obvious about, okay, I gave you some good information. Now here's the stuff you got to get the book to find out. Blah, 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 bullet, 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 bullet. It's more of a dance.
And it's something we're always working on, I know, just going back and forth together, especially on this last one. I went way overboard and gave everything away, and you were going back and taking back stuff and saying, my God, I don't need 486 uses for a tea bag. Would you stop already?
There was a point, wasn't there, where you wanted to give away a free copy of the actual book with the promotion?
Nice. I did not. Would you stop it? Okay, moving on. I want to talk about headlines that promise a benefit, because this is interesting, because sometimes you see a headline work that really doesn't have a benefit. It just arouses curiosity. It just seems like some strange thing you have to read about. But in general, those ones with a benefit get read more. But what I like is what he says next. So he says, the headlines which work best are those which promise the reader a benefit. And of course, because he's talking about, hard goods, right? He's got a wider wash, more miles per gallon, freedom from pimples, fewer cavities. But then he says, advertisements with headline that promise a benefit are read by an average of 4 times more people than advertisements that don't. So again, to your earlier comment, right, like if you want to put, to quote a recent and very popular teen novel, if you want the odds to be ever in your favor, as Katniss Everdeen would say, you want to use one that has a benefit, because you got 4 times more people. But now here's what's interesting.
On average. I would only point out that that's on average. And if you put 1 foot in hot water and 1 foot in cold water, you will not on average be comfortable. So that doesn't mean that a great headline that doesn't promise a benefit is going to be read 4 times less. It just means that a headline that's not a great headline that doesn't promise a benefit is really going to fail. And that if you're not going to promise a benefit, then boy, you better have a great headline that makes up for that by such curiosity value, such intrigue, such news, such newness that
you couldn't not read it.
That you couldn't not read it. Right.
And so what's interesting is that what he says next is try to find a promise which is not only persuasive but also unique. For example, makes a perfect cup of coffee every time may get the highest score on persuasion, but it's not unique, right? Lots of things could make a perfect cup of coffee every time. And I think this is where you and I are often, it's that balance is hard. And this is to your point about news, right? He says the news can be the announcement, an improvement in an old product. But you know what? I want to go back just a second. So is there anything that you wanted to say about this between, go for it.
There is. I mean, first of all, I really have to thank you for, one of the reasons we work so well together is you just insist on newness. And sometimes it makes me a little crazy, but you're quite right to, because, a lot of people, I think, myself included sometimes, write like we're writing in a vacuum. We write like nothing has come before and these people haven't been exposed to all this stuff. And yes, if we don't consider that, it's a perfectly good headline. Makes a good cup of coffee every time, makes a perfect cup of coffee every time, makes a whole lot of sense from that point of view. But when you look at it from the point of view of they're bombarded every day by things that purport to make a good cup of coffee, and that they're bombarded by Starbucks and all these things today, then today, even more than in his day, it's got to say, now you can get the kind of coffee that you can get in Italy, in a little coffee shop in Italy. You can make it at home in your own, coffee maker.
Well, and when you think about what disrupted the industry, it was those little pods, right? And that whole premise was now you always make 8 cups of coffee, you drink 2, you throw the rest out, or you want 1 cup in the morning and 1 cup in the afternoon, but if you keep the 8 cups on the burner the whole day, it tastes like sludge by the time you drink it at 2 p.m. It's like, get a hot, perfect cup of coffee, only 1 cup every time you want it, and you can see how that completely changed, not only interrupted the entire industry, right, but changed this idea of makes a perfect cup of coffee every time in a completely new way.
Right. That was the uniqueness that brought that. So that's a great question to ask in anything you're doing is there enough newness? Is there enough uniqueness in this relative to what they've been exposed to up till now? And if you're working on something like weight loss or money making or anything like that, that becomes even more important.
Everything. Yeah, they've seen everything. The next thing I want to talk about, and I want to kind of move through this next one quickly, but he says headlines which contain news. In this, he's talking about actually the announcement of a new product, an improvement, like we just talked about with the coffee. On average, ads with news are recalled by 22% more people than ads without news. And I'm just going to do a true confession moment here, which is I completely blew an assignment for none other than Clayton Makepeace recently by forgetting this. He was launching a new product. Really all he wanted was what we used to call, who is it who called it a duck for sale? Like all I needed to say was, there's this really cool thing that we have and you can get it now. And instead I got all caught up in the mystery and I had this whole lead and really all he wanted was, announcing brand new XYZ, buy it here, right? And I turned that into like it was like an Agora-style, mystery, intrigue promotion for a front-end product. And this was a back-end duck for sale. So don't forget newness because the thing isn't new to you, and don't think that you have to be, brilliant and diabolically clever. Again, ads with news are recalled by 22% more people than ads without news. So announcing a brand new duck for sale, right? That's all you need. Here's a couple more, and we can just quickly go through these. If you're advertising a kind of product which is only bought by a small group of people, put a word in your headline which will flag them down. And of course, I will go back to the control that I've talked about before in the call, which is it's the difference between your classic headline, which is, you have to remind me, how to beat any disease by, what is it, by something its hidden weakness?
I can't remember what the verb was. It's something like how to beat any disease by discovering its hidden weakness.
Okay. And versus mine, blood sugar problems, question mark, you may be contaminated by these 3, deadly toxins found in most homes. So I've called out, I'm saying blood sugar problems, question mark. I'm calling people who are worried like that. Yours is this generic, it's this mechanism of action. It's a really broad mechanism of action, but it's not just saying, blood sugar problems or arthritis. It's speaking to anybody, right, with a disease, which is pretty broad. Mm-hmm. Specifics work better than generalities. His example is Sears makes a profit of 5 cents, not Sears makes a tiny profit. When you put your headlines in quotes, you increase recall by an average of 28%. I often forget this one, and then I'll see people put something in quotes, and I'll be like, why are they making it a quote? And I'm like, oh, duh. And then I had to put this one in because, we're always arguing about the lengths of headlines. And he goes into much more depth in the book about, yes, you can go longer or shorter. But in general, again, your idea of generalities, in general, headlines of 10 words sell more merchandise than short headlines. And when you look at all these controls, you'll see they were usually 9 or 10 words. Okay. So now I want to talk about illustrations because when we are doing these projects together, you are really so much more visual than I am, and I will just take a small moment to vent in public about how you used to send me copy to review that you had designed in, what was it, Quark?
Oh, yeah.
And it had all your photos and your layouts and your little boxes, and I would get this thing, and I would have to get out my grandfather's magnifying glass, and you'd have like a whole thing laid out. Oh, my God. but so I love your skill with illustrations and with selecting photos. And I know because we've spent like 3 days trying to refine the right photo for an article in a magalog, but it matters, it really matters. And for Ogilvy, this is where he sort of uses curiosity in a positive way. He says the photographs which work hardest are those that arouse the reader's curiosity. What goes on here? Then he reads your copy to find out. Harold Rudolph called this magic element story appeal. And, of course, the most famous is the man in the Hathaway shirt. And he says, the eye patch injects the magic element of story appeal. And then I love this part where they had to strap the Baron to an eye so it wouldn't fall over. But can you say just a little bit about, and then we'll talk more about these ads, can you say a little bit about story appeal in illustrations, and what is that? What does story appeal mean, and what do you think makes for a good illustration for an advertisement?
Sure. I think story appeal is that element that makes you wonder, as he says, what's going on here. Like you see an eye patch, and there's a story there, obviously. Was he injured by the war? Is that the story? Did he have an eye disease? Is that the story? Does he just think he looks better in an eye patch? I wonder what the story is behind that. And you look at the photo here, and you see some cards spread out like that and someone else's hand there. There's an implied story there, too. There's an implied story of it. There's a game of cards going on. I wonder if the Baron is a skilled, is he playing bridge? Is he playing poker? Is he good at that? And so those kinds of things that you can inject in a photograph in the simplest way. It's the difference between showing a picture of some smiling woman, smiling, over the headline of your story is about how, her arthritis was cured or something, and seeing her with her husband with bicycles and mountains in the background. And there's a story there. They were going bicycling through it doesn't have to be a complex story with a plot and a denouement and a deus ex machina and 3 acts. It just has to imply that there's, interesting stuff going on that attracts people in a very primal way.
And he did such a great job of this in the copy. This is one of the ones I had to have my son stand there with the magnifying glass while I typed in order to put this in. So this is one of your freebies to add to your swipe file, folks. Hathaway revives the striped tartan. I had not known tartans were ever made in stripes until I visited Drummond Castle, and there saw striped tartans dating back to the 18th century. So wrote the head of Hathaway from Scotland earlier this year. Fired by his discovery, he immediately bicycled over to the town of, David?
Achterarder.
There to closet himself with James White, the great Scottish weaver. Out of the conference came a striped tartan in the great tradition, woven into a magnificent new kind of winter cotton. Again, newness, right? This is a new discovery. This is a winter cotton, lightweight but cozy. Just the ticket for any man who likes a comfortable shirt for cold weather but doesn't like wool. It comes in no less than 52 striped tartans and other designs. Each shirt is identified by the famous red H for Hathaway at the gusset on the tail for store names right. And then this is what I love. In that little bitty box that you see off to the right, this is totally for story value, has nothing to do with the product. He says, when our photographer arrived to take this picture, he found Baron Wrangle playing bridge. At the very minute, the Baron had been dealt 13 spades, an event so rare that it only happens in blah, 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 hands. And to me, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you rightly point out all the story value in those things. And also, though, the story value in the copy. That copy is just story after story. It's going to the castle, and he's going this, and he came upon this, and there was a great Scottish weaver. And it's just story after story after story. The other thing that I love about this is go back for a sec.
One more.
And one of his, you can tell. No, right where you were. Stop.
Oops, sorry.
No, flip back. Okay. One of the fingerprints of Ogilvy is the wonderful specificity and eruditeness of his copy, and the way he's not afraid to use a big word or a not well-known word. So each shirt is identified by the famous red H for Hathaway at the gusset of the tail. Now, I mean, I barely knew what a gusset was.
Who else says gusset? Right, I know.
Who says gusset or knows what a gusset is? But it's a very, it gave you this feeling of exactness and of his familiarity with the terms of
It's like a tailor. It feels like it's hand tailor because he's using a word that tailors would use, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's just such a great little detail that he throws in of exactly where the red H is.
So now I want to move on and talk a little bit about body copy, and we're still going to linger with the story here, right? Because what's interesting is it says, sometimes you can cast your entire advertisement in the form of a testimonial. My first ad for Austin Cars took the form of a letter from an anonymous diplomat who was sending his son to Groton with money he had saved driving in Austin, a combination of snobbery and economy. Unfortunately, a Time editor guessed that I was the anonymous diplomat and asked the headmaster of Groton to comment, and I had to send my son to another school. But I wondered if you can just talk about, again, the story value and how that works in this promotion especially.
Cool. Yeah, what about the story value, too, in the copy, in just what you just read from his book? You know, he could have said, notice, this is a very interesting use of testimonial, and it shows blah, 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 blah. And instead, he took up all that space to tell this whole story about how his ruse was found out. And, you know, it's just, he never stops telling stories.
I want to look at this intro to this because this speaks to what you were saying to me of his highbrow tone of speaking up to the reader. It's almost like a tone of aspiration, right? And he says, so here's, again, I didn't copy the whole thing for you all, but here's the intro. I am sending my son to Groton with money I have saved driving Austin's. Private letter from an anonymous diplomat. Recently, we got this letter from a man who used to ornament the diplomatic corps. He writes,
what a great
soon after I left,
used to ornament the diplomatic
corps.
Not used to be
ornament.
Yeah.
I love it. He writes, soon after I left the embassy, I bought an Austin. We don't have a chauffeur nowadays. My wife has taken over that job. She drives me to and from the station every day. She drives the children to school. She does the shopping. She drives over to Greenwich Hospital and to Garden Club meetings, and so on and so forth. A dozen times I have heard her say, I simply couldn't cope with all this chauffeuring if I still had to lug around that heavy old juggernaut we used to own. My own
that was
enthusiasm
probably their Rolls Royce that they gave up when they switched.
When he lost the Rolls Royce account.
Yeah. I think he resigned it actually.
He did because they sent lousy quality over, right?
Yeah, but that's probably the old juggernaut she's referring to.
My own enthusiasm for Austin is based on a more material consideration. In a word, the car has saved me a fortune. At a dinner party last night, I heard myself saying, I am going to send my son to Groton with the money I have saved owning an Austin.
Only Ogilvy could quote himself.
I know. I heard myself saying, right?
Isn't that beautiful how he just quotes himself like that and finds a way to do it?
And it's just, I mean, he gets both economy and snobbery in her. She's coping with the loss of her chauffeur, where most people reading this probably never had a chauffeur. Or maybe they did, because an Austin is a pricey car, right? And back then, you often had a driver, you know. Right. But then he goes right into saying, you know, all this lovely stuff that she says. He's like, but frankly, I like it because it saved me a fortune. But he doesn't come off as looking like he's a penny pincher, right? It's just this great combination of both.
Well, he was Scottish after all, so that gene in him.
That's right. I just want to say, as a word of caution to folks, because this is a very powerful way to do it, is with testimonials, but I'm sure you all know, but you have to be aware that there's a lot of regulations around the use of testimonials right now. So if you're thinking of doing something similar for a client of yours, I urge you to talk to them first and make sure you understand the parameters. Lois Mentrop, who works with David and I, who will also be there at boot camp with us, is working on one for a client of ours right now, and it's truly a customer of the product. It's a trading product. This guy sends an email every other week to the person running the service, just going on and on about how much he loves it and how much value he gets out of it. And so we're telling his story, but we have to be careful around all these things, like we can't imply that people are going to make as much money as he made, and we can't, you know, there's all these rules. So I just sort of throw in that cautionary tone. And I know, David, you've done some clever things where you sort of made up stories. Remember the one for the Wylands where
oh,
where
thanks. You've done some clever things where you've just made stuff up. No. You worked around it. The woman with the toilet, like, was it closed? Yeah.
What was it? Where, like, you said, my guest
was like
coming.
It was like a little letters to the editor kind of a format, where someone would write into the Wylands and say, I got guests coming over and my toilet's stuffed up, what do I do? And they would have a good household hint solution, like pour dishwasher detergent down the toilet, that will unstuff it if you don't have a plunger, you know, that works. And it just made it into a fun thing, which was part test. And of course, then they wrote back and said, "Oh, you know, that worked great, thank you." And it became sort of testimonial-ish without actually being a testimonial.
So there's definitely ways to get around it, and we used one recently in the control we just got, where we had all these tips for things like, you know, it was kitchen cabinet cures, so it was like things for hemorrhoids and things for everything under the sun. And so you don't want to just have a list, you know, how to cure your X, how to cure your Y, how to cure your, like, it, people's eyes glaze over. So one thing that David and I tried was, remember the story about the guy so again, I sort of made up an implied letter from someone. It had a picture of a guy, you know, driving in his car, and it said, you know, if you've just driven across country, you know, 18 hours straight to make it to your daughter's wedding in time, and you get out of the car and your hemorrhoids are so bad you're walking like John Wayne, what do you do? And then we put in our solution. And now we've made a story element instead of just saying simple cure for hemorrhoids.
You were just determined to bring in hemorrhoids into this call one way or another, weren't you?
I think I win $20. It could only get worse. Now you're going to have to up the ante. God knows what you're going to bring up next. So what I want to do now is talk about layouts, because for Ogilvy, especially working in a print medium, layouts were critical. You know what I mean? And you and I talked about some of the rules that he had. And so I'm going to kind of whip through these, and then I want to look at this Hammer ad and just talk about this briefly. So he said copy has priority over illustration. Copy is set in serif type. That means it has those little feet, right? 3 columns of type, 35 to 45 characters wide. Again, because people can't read wider than that. You go off the page.
Also, it goes off the border. Are you getting on yours where it goes off the border? Because I think it's very funny.
I am, and I think it has to do with how it was uploaded.
Mine it does, and I think it's very funny that Ogilvy on layouts. You know, try to keep within, rule number 1, try to keep within borders.
I'm going to smack you. It looks fine printed out. I don't know what it's doing on my screen. I know.
Rule number 2, consider the medium in which your copy will be read.
All right, I'm going to hit you. And don't get started on those footnotes. We're not going into footnotes. Every photograph has a caption because he found that photographs were always, the captions were always read. And so people, I see this all the time, I'm sure you do too, David, where the photograph is wasted because the person didn't put a caption under it, right?
Right.
Copy starts with a drop initial. That's just like a big, you know, initial letter. Type is set on black on white, because of course, you know, he goes on and on about reverse type, which makes me crazy too. I can't read anything in reverse type. And then I love this. Next time you construct an ad, pretend you're an editor. You will get more readership than trying to come up with some creative, splashy version. And look how simple this layout is. I mean, look how simple that is, really. And you can see it's following the rules, right? We've got the headline. We've got a drop cap right here with the T. He's got serif type. He's got it in 3 columns. He's not trying to do one line of text that goes across 2 pages. I know in the early days of the internet, depending on how you opened your email in a window, I had things that were all the way across my 17-inch monitor. You know what I mean? And the text never wrapped. Well, I'm not going to read that. It was exhausting. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of talk about in terms of Ogilvy and his, I know we're going to talk about the guarantee next in just a second, but anything about his his layout, because really so many of his ads follow this simple formula, and obviously it was powerful, but, you know.
Yeah, you know, I think it's important to kind of feel the power of it too, not just to know what the rules are, but to look at it and feel how that hammer draws you in, feel how that big box, that big picture like that draws you into it, and how the hammer being so full screen, full size like that, takes up the whole page, draws you into it, and how naturally your eye flows. It's almost like the hammer's pointing to the headline.
It is, right? It's pointing right to a new hammer free of this Sears 4-star value. It's pointing right to it. You're right. I didn't even catch that until now. It literally almost makes an arrow with the hammer. Yeah,
and, you know, you've got to feel. You know, all this can't be just intellectual. You've got to feel the way your eye is drawn in something that you've done. Or a lot of times what you'll feel is your eye doesn't know where to go. You look at a piece of copy, you look at some, you know, a layout, and all these things are like competing for your attention.
Right.
You don't know where to start. But this, you know exactly where to start. You look at the photo draws you into the headline draws you right into the copy.
Exactly. And usually when I notice is when my eye goes out of the copy. Like if like you've often pointed this out to me too, you'll be like, she's looking to the right. Or do you remember we went around and around with that crazy, we had a bottle of cough syrup and a spoon, and we couldn't get it, so the spoon would lead down into the copy. It kept like literally pouring your eye off the page. It matters, because once people leave the page, you can't get them back. The other thing we're just going to talk about quickly here is you mentioned, you know, another reason why you picked this image to talk about was because of the huge guarantee. They lead with the guarantee. A new hammer free. If the Sears 4-star value ever breaks, it is unconditionally guaranteed to give satisfaction, or Sears will replace. And then he goes, the whole ad is actually a guarantee, right? And it's filled with information about why the hammer really never will break, you know, when we talk about him giving, which is something he did often. He would spend this time telling you all these details about the product, many of which people had never, you know, heard about. I mean, he really goes into depth on how it's formed, and you can see this little notch up there on the one of the little hammer arm thingies, and that notch helps you pull out nails, and the shock absorber and the handle of it. I mean, the whole thing is
the type of steel, the type of rubber, you know, for an easy grip. You know, the other thing too, I think that's important in this is the ability to see what's important, to see what's new, to see what's going to get people's attention. Because Sears probably said to him, you know, at the end of a long presentation, they probably said, and, you know, and of course we've got a guarantee, you know, if the hammer ever breaks, we'll send them a new one or whatever. And, you know, he had the foresight to say, wait, that's important. You mean if this hammer ever breaks, ever, you get a new hammer? And they said, well, yeah, that's just our guarantee. You know, we do that with all our stuff or whatever. But he saw that would translate into a great ad, and it did.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, like you said, having that instinct to zero in on something like that and then focus on it. And there's lots of examples of guarantees that have become winning promotions based on the strength of the guarantee.
Which brings us nicely into research, which is where you find all this.
Didn't you catch that transition? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
So how did he know all those things that hammer did, and the steel and the handle, right? Well, because he did his homework. Research has often led me to good ideas, such as the eye patch and the Hathaway campaign. I have seen ideas so wild that nobody in his senses would dare use them until research found they worked. And here he's talking about travel writing, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this research section, but I love this. He said, when I had the idea of writing headlines for French tourism in French, now mind you, these were in English publications, right? My partners told me I was nuts until research revealed that French headlines were more effective than English headlines. Research
so we should write all our headlines in French from now on.
I think so. That's what I'm going to do next, exactly.
Okay.
So again, he's talking about travel, and he says, so he did his research, right? He was doing these travel ads for Britain, as they said in the day, and he found out that what American tourists most wanted to see was history, like Westminster Abbey and the Tower of London, you know, that kind of thing. So that's what he featured in his advertisements. But then the British press flayed him alive because they said, well, you made us look like, you know, we're a bunch of of quaint aristocrats living in the past, and why didn't you talk about our new nuclear power station? And he said, because our research showed that American tourists had no desire to see those things. That's why. And so what he created is not a picture of a power station, but this amazing advertisement here.
You know, we can laugh at the obviousness of that, but of course the implication is that it becomes far more subtle than that, and so you wind up talking about things that seem like good benefits, you know, not realizing that there are deeper benefits that your prospect really cares about that you would be able to get to with good research or going out and talking to them and seeing what they're really, you know, concerned about.
That's interesting. That's true. And I love when he says that in the beginning of, you know, you can't, at least in his case, I mean, there are some people who are really gifted at just sort of like being in their prospect's mind. But most of us, you have to talk to people because they are ideas, quote, so wild that nobody in his senses would have come up with them, except research showed it to be true. And that's maybe where a new writer can get an advantage, because I think sometimes an established writer, I know I'm guilty of this too, I can get lazy if I'm working on the same type of product over and over again, and I think that I know all there is to know about it, and someone comes along who really does their homework and digs in. One of the longest running controls I've had for SoundView, that detox package for Pectosol, started out, if you remember, with that headline, if you were between the ages of blank and blank, you may have been contaminated with this deadly toxin, and then it went into all the studies that showed that the generation that was basically 60 and above had the most toxins in their blood of any generation. That came about because I was talking to a friend of mine who's very concerned about toxins in her body, and I'm just sort of sitting around, you know, kind of pitching ideas to her and just trying to elicit conversation, and she just says to me out of the blue, you know what really scares the tar out of me? And I said, no, what? And she said, I grew up in a neighborhood where there was a dump nearby and I didn't know it. Both my parents smoked cigarettes from the day I was born until I left home. When I went to college, like, she went through everything in her environment over her life, and she said, so now I never use plastics and I don't smoke and I eat organic food and blah, 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 but I keep wondering, where's all that stuff that I was exposed to all those years ago? Like, what's the price I'll pay for that? And that's where that headline came out of, with, of course,
and we don't think of that as research,
brilliant manipulation.
But it really is.
It is.
We think of research as we have to talk to 100 people and statistically validate what they've said. But sometimes it's just talking to one person and realizing, wow. I always love the example. John Carlton gives a great example of, you know, when you really hit the real benefit.
Yeah.
And what he was advertising a course, you know, he did a lot of golf stuff, and they had a course. One of the courses was to women. And, you know, they're doing all this stuff about, you know, you hit drives farther and, you know, do this and better putting and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they did some research, and they found out that what really women really want when it comes to golf is they want to beat their husbands. They want to, you know, they just want to beat better than the men in their life. They want to just win.
They want to crush him on the golf course.
They want to crush them on the golf course. And so they did advertising, which is, you know, like how to beat your husband at golf kind of an appeal, more than a, you know, how to sink a putt every time or how to drive
I love it.
yard. And that's when you hit into something like that, that is just so powerful.
Yeah, it's like a game changer then. It's, I mean, to use that hokey phrase, but it's true. Then it completely changes the conversation.
Right. And then your headline, it's not so much how you phrase your headline, it's what your headline is about.
Right. It's the whole concept is different.
It's the concept behind it. Right.
So I'm going to just read this copy really quickly here, and you folks have it now in your presentation as, again, something to add to your swipe file. And I know, because you guys have heard me preach about this forever, that you are all building a swipe file as we speak, right? And the reason I want to look at this language is because we're going to go into a special copywriting challenge that David is going to put forth to you guys next. So I want to talk about the language and sort of the meta level from here, David, about what makes an Ogilvy tone and style Ogilvy. So here's, let's just read this briefly and put a little Ogilvy in the air, right? This is, okay, now you got to catch me. This is Henry VII, yes?
Right.
This is Henry VII, tread softly past the long, long sleep of kings. This is Henry VII's chapel in Westminster Abbey. These windows have filtered the sunlight of 5 centuries. They have also seen the crowning of 22 kings. 3 monarchs rest here now, Henry, Elizabeth, and Mary. Such are their names in sleep. No titles, no trumpets. The batters hang battle-heavy and becalmed, but still the royal crown remains. I'm not even going to attempt that one. When you go to Britain, make yourself this promise. Visit at least one of the 30 great cathedrals. Their famous names Thunder, Durham, and Armagh, or they chime Lincoln and Canterbury, and sometimes they whisper Winchester, Norwich, Salisbury, and Wells. Get a map and make your choice. Each cathedral transcends the noblest single work of art. It is a pinnacle of faith and an act of centuries. It is an offering of human hands as close to Abraham as it is to Bach. Listen to the soaring choirs at evensong, and if you can, go at Christmas or Easter. You will rejoice that you did. I mean, that is unbelievable.
You know, you could really take just one sentence of that. You could take one paragraph, and you could see what makes it great in a way. You know, these windows have filtered the sunlight of 5 centuries. You know, what a great way to say that something is 5 centuries old.
It's totally different.
Way. Yeah. Have filtered
these are old churches.
And not even have seen the sunlight of 5 centuries, or, you know, the sunlight of 5 centuries has gone through these windows. They have filtered the sunlight of 5 centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Just every word is perfect. Every word adds something.
The crowning of 22 kings and the alliteration, right? Filter the sunlight of 5 centuries, crowning of 22 kings.
Mm-hmm. The banners hang battle heavy and becalmed is a great
and such are their names in sleep, all those S's. The whole thing, it's like a poem, right? No titles, no trumpets.
You know, I bet it is. I bet if you laid it out, which is interesting because that's what Churchill
it reads like iambic
do
pentameter.
With his speeches. He would lay them out in like they were poems and read them that way.
Really?
And he thought that way. Well, you can see we would fight them from the battlefield. We will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them in the hills. We will do this. It's very, and this is the same thing. You're right. It's like a poem.
And I love the repetition, right? And the what do you call that? Like the parallel construction. Am I saying the right thing? Their famous names thunder, or they chime, and sometimes they whisper.
Right. There's a parallelism there. Yeah.
And then this is where he elevates it almost. It becomes, you know, spiritual, right? Where he says it transcends the noblest single work of art, a pinnacle of faith and an act of centuries. But yet he doesn't tie it to a religion or say, you know, he's so subtle about it, right? It is an offering of human hands as close to Abraham as it is to Bach, right? It's very, so he doesn't offend anyone by picking a particular religion or speaking about the Church of England versus the Protestant Reformation versus the Catholic Church, right? It's just he's making it a pinnacle of faith and an act of centuries. It's just unbelievable. So now I want to have a little fun here. What
have we been having up till now?
You know what my mother-in-law always says, up till now I've had a good time. So you made me this challenge the other day, and I want to put it out to everyone here. And I want to share a few of the things that you sent to me. I'm just going to kind of read this a little bit. So what your challenge to me was, take a product that you use and love and try to write an Ogilvy-style ad for it. So I'm saying use an intriguing illustration or photo, follow his headline rules, imitate his witty, slightly snobby, engaging tone. And you took it up a level. The email you sent to me, you said, what are the big, broad takeaways from Ogilvy's book for me, for you, and how do our listeners find theirs? Because great books are not only rules and formulas and all that, but a shift in how you think and how you look at copy and people and the world. You're doing a little Ogilvy style writing here, dear.
For me, you can't help but write like Ogilvy when you read
I know.
Yeah.
And this, you said, for me with Ogilvy, that's things like charming the reader into paying attention and submitting, and speaking to their highest intelligence, not their lowest. It's also not being afraid to show that you are stunningly well informed about the product and in general, and being a student of what works and what doesn't and why. That's huge. Don't blindly follow the rules. Do what he did. Know what people say now and what they have said in the past about what works and what doesn't, and then use your own good judgment and experience and formulate your own darn rules. And don't be afraid to be just a bit shocking or controversial, cloaked, of course, in extraordinarily good taste. It was just brilliant. It was just brilliant the way you said it.
Well, thank you. I noticed you altered my copy in there, by the way.
I only changed one word. This is a G-rated program.
Don't even change one word of my copy. How dare you?
How dare you touch my copy? So I'm going to challenge everybody to do this and to post it on the Facebook page. And just before we wrap up and go into Q&A here, David, I want to so here's the idea I had. So you sent me this challenge, right? So let's just take 2 seconds here and brainstorm this, because this is usually how our calls start, right? I say, David, I got this really great idea. What do you think? And you're like, I don't know. It's kind of boring. Doesn't really do it for me. So here's the idea I had that would use this slightly snobbish tone. I have a fountain pen from Levenger that I've had for 10 years that I love, like a real fountain pen, you know, with a bottle of ink. And it was given to me by my best friend from college. So we've now known each other almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years this year. And we started in college handwriting each other's letters, and we still continue today, despite the fact that we both have email. And we send 2 or 3 a year, and I've kept all of his letters, and he's kept all of mine. So I had this idea for an ad for the Levenger pen, right, that the picture would be the pen and an inkwell and my letters like strewn out, and the story would somehow start out with, you know, these letters that we write back and forth to each other and how we've continued that, and somehow that snob appeal of it's not the same when it comes by email, right? And then the ad would, of course, be for Levenger, the fountain pens, and their ink. What do you think?
I like that. I think that's a good model for people to use, is to really find a personal story like that goes with whatever you're selling. Mm-hmm. And that was a brilliant way to do it. You know, the old letters that mean a lot to you, that clearly convey the sentimentality that makes writing with a pen so important, and so to have value, and a great story that you can tell about your friend in college. And then how your husband found the letters and he got all upset. Right. And, you know,
yeah, I knew you had to go there somewhere.
What? You don't handwrite letters to me.
That's right. What do you mean you're handwriting letters to somebody? Okay, so you all now have the gauntlet has been thrown. I want you all, let's post them on Facebook, and then we can respond to each other's. David, if you would maybe pop in on Facebook periodically and see what kind of fun we're having, and feel free to add a comment to ours.
Okay.
I just want to end with, I have been encouraging book club members to please post questions for folks on the Facebook page. And this time, I didn't get a question, but I got a really nice comment. And Bob Massey said, a true classic. Ogilvy was so eloquent and entertaining. I would read his work even if I wasn't interested in improving my own copywriting. This should make for a rich discussion, and I think that's exactly what you were talking about with Ogilvy's language. I want to invite you all next month. Yes, we're going to get to Q&A, but I want to invite you all real quickly. Next month, our book is The War of Art. David, you are forbidden to say any comment about my procrastination here. I love this book. I love this book because I have a huge, huge issue with procrastination, as David will know, mainly caused by complete fear and terror that causes me to, like, freeze up and do anything, like, you know, drink a bottle of bourbon and eat a box of chocolates instead of write my copy until we're at the 11th hour, and then I just start sending him stuff like every 5 minutes.
I would just like to point out the brilliance that you have shown in light of the procrastination problem that you have and the fear that you have of having chosen mentors like myself in Paris who are nothing if not brutal in terms of the evaluation of copy that they get, and have a total inability to say anything nice about copy because they just figure, well, if it's good, I don't have to say anything about the good parts because the good parts are good. I just have to say stuff about the bad parts.
Right, which causes me to have another bottle of bourbon and fall under the desk again.
And get even more behind. So anyway, good selection of mentors there.
Good selection, yes. I love The War of Art because it speaks to that internal struggle. So for those of you who never have a struggle, you get to your desk every day, you're happy-go-lucky, away you do, good for you, you can skip next month. But for the rest of humanity who fights looking at that blank page, I hope you'll join me and Nick. One of the reasons I asked Nick to do this with me was because he has this fantastic report that I read years ago on writing rituals. And I had never knew anyone else was as superstitious about all the little things they do before they start writing as I was, or let alone has all the stuff in my office. Next month I promise to put up a picture of all the crazy mojo I pile around my desk. So that's why I asked Nick to join us, and here's what Nick said, which I think is great. He says, I've been writing about productivity for many years. I've taught and coached hundreds of freelancers on how to do their best work and get it done. But poor me, I have been doing this without having first read Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art, which I just finished. This must be one of the only self-help books out there that has zero fluff, zero pampering, and zero rah-rah nonsense. It's tough, hard-hitting, and massively useful. In The War of Art, you'll learn how to become a pro. A pro means you sit down to work 5 days a week and get the work done every time. Being a pro means you are immune to writer's block and procrastination. Being a pro means you can tap in your most inspired, creative, and productive self by focusing on the work in front of you. If you haven't read this book and taken it to heart, I doubt you have achieved your true potential. In other words, go get it and read it now. And I'm really looking forward to this call with Nick, and I'm excited. And Katie, I wonder if you could let us know quickly our September book club winners for their own copy of The War of Art.
Absolutely. And I already see a few names that I cannot pronounce. Starting with the first one, but
this happens to us every time.
Wow, what do you only award this to people with unpronounceable names? Is that the criteria for?
We do. So if your name's here, you've won. No.
There you go.
Marcella, I'm going to leave it at that. Roger Chappelle, Diane Sagan, Milt Trosper, Paul Maldonado, Daniel Fox, Christopher Mello, Stacy Mahaffey, Carlos, wow, that's a lot of names, Carlos Alberto Rodriguez Torres, and Russell Richer. Congratulations, you all will be receiving The War of Art shortly, coming direct from Amazon. So look for the box with a smile on it.
I love it. And now I just wanted to ask Katie, do we have any questions, last-minute questions for our guests before we go on and talk about preview of some of our other books?
I have a question for each of you. We don't have much time left, so I do want to say, Marcella, what was your one biggest takeaway from revisiting this book?
From going back to it?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the thing that David has spoken about, which is don't be afraid to sometimes speak up to your reader instead of down to your reader. And I think I can get really caught up in, the Fleisch-Kincaid scale and staying in this particular grade level and not using big words. And then I see some of these romantic language of Ogilvy that was very powerful for the specific products that he was selling. And so I think I had that aha moment of don't take this rule so rigidly and really look at what language fits with your product. And that's what I'm going to try to do when I work on this fountain pen ad, kind of let myself play a little bit and see what comes out.
Great. And David, the same question. I know you've read this book many times, but what was your biggest takeaway rereading it for our conversation today?
Whenever I read Ogilvy, I think I'm struck anew by the level of intelligence that he brings to thinking about things, the depth that he thinks about things, the way he looks at things so analytically and says, let's look at the research and find out whether reverse types works or doesn't work. Let's see what types of headlines work. And, he brings that research to how he thinks about it, and that depth to how he thinks about it, and he brings that research to how he writes. As Marcella said, his level of intelligence that he speaks to the reader like that. So I just, it just inspires me to get my own intelligence up a notch, and engage my mind more, because I see how constantly engaged his mind is.
That's a great takeaway. I do just want to put out a last call. If anybody has a question or comment, now's the time to do it. Here we go.
Whoa.
Bill Dean, great discussion. Ashamed to confess, I had a very different take on the book after reading it. Not a bad impression, but this analysis gave me a completely different and much better perspective. Thank you. So that's
great.
Yeah.
I could see how going back. Go ahead, dear.
No, I was going to say I could see how maybe reading Ogilvy for the first time can be a little off-putting, could be a little like he could seem a little snobbish and a little full of himself and a little too sure of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of, he just kind of grows on you, I think.
Right. I agree, and I applaud you for tuning in to see what all the fuss was about, and now I think you see it.
I think for me too. Go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say I think the reason I started when Katie said, would you be willing to do this book club, because it does take a lot of time, and I'm very busy and I've got tons of work. I'm not complaining. But the reason I immediately said yes instead of no, I'm too busy, I got all this other stuff going on, was because I knew I needed to do this, because I knew that just going through what we're calling the canon of copywriting books one time, it's like, it's like driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour. The scenery is flying past me. Oh, there's a deer, there's a tree, there's a lake. It's too fast for me to bring it all in. But when we come back and we're going through these books one at a time, and in the companionship of someone like David, who really has been, working in this industry for, well more than a decade, more than I have, right, that I now slow down and really get something deeper and more valuable, and the lessons kind of get more resident in me, like they kind of lodge themselves in me. And that was purely selfishness, honestly, on my part when I said I would do this, because I knew I would get so much out of it. And it's been proven on every single call with every book that we've done. And with that, I want to talk about, some of you have been asking about what we have coming up. And Katie just locked in 2 more guests for us. So some of you know that the October selection is going to be live at boot camp. We're going to do Scientific Advertising by Claude Hopkins, which is, again, one of the books that actually Ogilvy recommends in his reading list in the back, which I think is perfect. And Richard Armstrong is going to be my guest, who's an absolute sweetheart, and I'm super excited to have him. Then in November, Bob Bly has selected a book on producing ideas, which I think is absolutely fascinating, because really, when we're talking about coming up with big ideas, that's key. And so this is Technique for Producing Ideas by James Webb Young, and he's also someone who's mentioned and talked about in Ogilvy's book, which is perfect. And then January, we're going to have a special guest, Gordon Graham, and we're going to dig into The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, which is sort of like, the reference book that should be on every writer's desk. I know there's times when Paris and David has wished I had referred to it more often, because I can get pretty creative sometimes with grammar and style usage. So I will make sure to post these on the Facebook page. So again, remember, please join our Great Books Club Facebook page. You can leave comments. You're, of course, going to put your ad for David and I there. I'm going to commit to finishing my fountain pen ad and getting that up in the next week or two. I am so thrilled and excited that David was able to join us today. I had a great time, which I always do when I'm on the phone with David. And is there anything else we need to say, Katie?
No. I think, again, I just want to extend a big thank you to both of you. This was so enjoyable and informative and entertaining and insightful and all those great words. and looking forward to next month.
Thanks so much. David, any last words of advice, a joke?
Put me on the spot, why don't you?
I have to say, your favorite joke that you ever told me was the one about the peanuts.
Oh.
It's so stupid, but I love it. Yes, tell the peanut joke now.
The one about the two peanuts.
Two
peanuts were walking down the road in a bad neighborhood, and one of them was assaulted.
Yes. I know, it's so dumb, but I love it.
Time to. Where's the hook? Let's go.
Where's the hook?
We've been gonged, right. David. We've been gonged.
I do want to say that, like Marcella, I get a lot from rereading these books and from talking about them, and that I've just really enjoyed being on this call. And thank you all for putting it together and inviting me.
Thanks.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys. Take care. We'll see you next month with The War of Art.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.